Hey guys, I'm your host Alex Powell, and today we're going to be joined by Kayla Andrade. She is the leader of the Ontario Landlord and Tenant Watch, and she has done some remarkable things advocating for fair ruling in terms of landlord and tenant disputes and regulations and rules. We all know how challenging it is right now in Ontario to work within the rules, especially when the landlord tenant board wait times are as long as they are, upwards of 8-9 months for some hearings. So Kayla has done an awesome job championing it thus far, and she's just getting warmed up by the sounds of it. So please join me in welcoming her, and I hope you guys enjoy this episode. Hello, everybody. I am here today with a very special guest and someone who I have now come to know very well and could call a dear friend, Kayla Andrade. She is the leader of the Ontario Landlords Watch, and she is instrumental and somebody that I have a little shrine. Kayla and I have a little shrine of you at home that we light a candle next to every single day. I don't know if you know that, but just the things that you're doing for landlords and for real estate investors, and to try and even out the playing field a little bit and try and make things a little bit more fair, I think are so incredibly honorable and good. And so we always want to support you in just about anything you do. So hopefully this platform is one of those, and hopefully it adds to one extra viewer at least for you, and the great things you do. So first and foremost, how are you?
Good. Thank you so much. You have me glowing already with like telling me you have a shrine. I'm like, I've heard a lot of
Yeah,
that stuff. And it just goes to the importance of how support in this industry is needed for both the landlords and the tenants. So I'm glad to have met you guys, support you what you're doing, because we all have to support each other together. This the entire private housing industry. It's not just landlords, it's property managers, anyone's in the contracting business. We have to, pool our efforts together as the private housing sector.
for sure, for sure. So on that, can you talk to me a little bit about where things are at in your world right now? I know that um, you know a lot of investors that I know of, typically our approach is to gripe about it. We might do like a comment on Facebook or something about a terrible experience that we've had, and we've all seen these nightmare tenant scenarios. I think that you have a much more practical and solutions based approach on how to fight these things, and it doesn't by any means mean it's quick. However, I think that you're getting the right voices, and I think you're getting the right messages. And just before we jumped on the call here, you were saying that you just did an interview. Was it Global News?
Yeah, we have a segment coming up on Wednesday with Global News, and they were talking about the landlord that's in Brampton who is now out $30,000 from his tenant, and the tenant is still not vacated the property. And that was initial N11 that the tenant had signed, and then through that N11, the tenant had changed his mind, but told the board that his signature was forged and that he didn't sign an N11. So
Oh,
they
gee.
wanted him out by the end of February. And then he also has a non payment of rent application that still hasn't been heard. So they're starting to highlight the abuse that tenants are taking advantage of because of how broken the landlord and tenant board is, and how there's now 53,000 applications still backlogged at the landlord and tenant board.
Yeah, at a certain point, they had committed funding towards hiring more adjudicators. But I think at the end of the day, when you're clogging up adjudication with simple things like non payment of rent, and
Mhm.
things that I personally think that you can hire somebody at a high school to do some pretty low level math, like simple addition. Oh, you've missed a couple dollars here or there. Yes, you have not paid. Okay, this is pretty clear cut. I don't know where the refuting is. I don't know where, you
It's
know.
simple, if the landlord, has a tenant that's not paying rent, and let's say they serve the tenant the end on the second of the month, they should be able to file that paperwork right away to the landlord and tenant board. That puts the tenant now should be on a 14-day cycle in order to put a payment plan in place that they have to pay on time and in full. And if they don't, the landlord should get a default order. No hearing should be done. And if a tenant, even if the landlord and tenant board wants to call the tenant and say, hey, just want to let you know to check your portal, you do have an application against you for non-payment of rent. Here are some local service managers to help you with rent relief. If you do qualify, they will help you pay the rent so that it could avoid the default order. So there's lots of different solutions out there, but unfortunately the government's using the landlords as a small social agency for the government without getting any type of compensation. So, are we private housing providers, or are we affordable government housing by force and not by choice? And we have to be able to say, no, there's a difference between shelters, there's a difference between government housing, and there's certainly a difference with private housing providers, and they need their protection and they need their access to justice in a timely manner.
Well, I see this issue like there's a couple of different facets to this issue. One is that, and I think the most imperative is the fact that the squeaky wheel gets the oil, and the fact that there are a lot more tenants obviously than there are landlords. We're kind of up against like an uphill battle when it comes to creating any sort of a fair playing field. And what I find often too is that if you look at a real estate investor, and I'm not trying to blow smoke up our own asses kind of thing. However, if you think about it, we are an economic driving force. When you look at real estate investors and you look at, the government needs investment into their cities. That's how they raise their property taxes. By raising property taxes, they can build roads and schools and, hospitals, whatever they need to help sustain the infrastructure that grows within the cities. Now you have a small group of people that are committed to, for profit, granted, do this, but then, you get demonized by these, news articles that come out, and these tenants, you get a tenant that ends up making the news, and all of a sudden that's highlighted big time because obviously the majority of the viewers are all tenants as well. So I feel like despite all the issues, and I think, when I've known you now for a few years, even when we first started talking, there were already issues that were highlighted, but I just, do you see like progress on your end?
Well, let's go back a little bit toward like the squeaky wheel gets the grease, because they do see a lot of tenants out there, a lot of tenant activist groups. Well, some of these tenant activist groups are actually getting government grants. They're getting city grants, being able to fulfill, trying to keep tenants in their homes, not understanding that the bad housing policies that our elected officials are creating, they're the ones who are causing this turmoil. So if you, like, let's say rent control, for example, well, if you gave a fair and balanced rent control, not a cap of 2.5%, and continue to keep putting the taxes, the property taxes, the insurance, the utilities, you keep putting that up on the landlord, but now you're saying, no, you can't raise the rent when you have tenants that are staying put in their properties longer. Okay, well, what's that's going to do? It's going to be like, okay, well, maybe my mom is an option to move into that place for a year because it's a business. The numbers need to make sense. So if they just change that little rent control section, you wouldn't see more landlords trying to do personal use applications or getting out of the business altogether. So when we look at what our tenants are fighting for, they're saying, hey, we want you to stop these AGIs, the above the guideline rent increases. And we're like, whoa, like we have aging infrastructure, just like the city and the government has their aging infrastructure for their government housing units, but it's easy for them to flatten the building, build more, no problem, because it's government. But when private wants to do it, then we have, the NIMBYism in the city, or the councilors are like, no, we don't want you doing that. And then it prevents them from wanting to continue to keep putting that supply to the market. But our tenants in itself, you can go ahead and say, hey, we don't want an AGI, but it's measly like 9% over 3 years if approved. And it's very, very tough. Like you have to have some serious renovations, capital expenses in order to get that even approved at the landlord and tenant board. And it's a hearing again, right? So another rule, another housing policy that is bringing more of a backlog at the board, because it's really like, here's your paperwork. This is the work. This is what's been done. Someone should read it. Okay, stamped of approval, send it in. Why are we debating this? This is where we have a lot of applications going to the board that don't need to be there, but the tenants and what they're fighting and what the elected officials are doing it's literally doing more damage to them, because now the landlords have just stepped up their screening process. And if you've taken part in a rent strike movement, and we have had your landlord report that to the collection agency or to a reporting agency, and we do our credit checks, are you going to take that tenant now knowing that they took part in a rent strike movement? Or are you going to take a tenant who just had to be brought to the landlord and tenant board because they refused to move out of their rental unit for personal use applications?
Yeah, honestly, we're sitting at, I think we're in the process of leasing out like 8 different units, some for ourselves, some for clients, and you would not believe. Well, I'm sure you believe, but for the viewers out there, you wouldn't believe how many people send fraudulent credit checks or credit reports. It is
Mm-hmm.
like 1 in every 3 applicants, I would say. It's that bad, and it's
Oh
wild.
yeah.
Like we had one from, and a lot of them are from real estate agents. Real estate agents will submit documentation to us because we do list on the MLS as well for some clients, and they'll be like, yeah, my client has like a 690 credit score, and we always verify it through our own means. It comes back at like 420. You're like, how do you not vet this? Or like, as an agent, where is your accountability towards it as well? So, it just goes to show you how muddy these waters are getting and how desperate some people are getting too, because the whole credit system is set up in order to kind of validate what type of person you are in terms of paying back debt and keeping your obligations you've agreed to. But you're right. Now our screening process is ironclad, and we have a great payment ratio because of it, and we're very happy because of it. However, that's also come from like years of like slogging through the mud and just eating crap left, right, and center, I guess. So, but it's not
No,
easy.
they're doing everything. They're creating websites, pretending that's the job where they work, right? Like they do have the fraudulent, they have their friends pretending that they're the landlord. There's so much to that we need to work on. You got to base it on the character of the person too. So it's not just the paperwork, it's about who they are. It's about getting
Mhm.
to know who they are as a person, their lifestyle in a very calm, collective manner, because god, you ask one question now and it could be like a human rights complaint against you. So you made landlording so difficult in the province. Like, what do they expect that's going to happen when you see your supply walking out the door now, and the investors are getting into the states, they're going into Costa Rica, we're getting them building plazas in Portugal. Like,
We've
they're
been
like,
buying in the U.S. because of that too. I don't have these issues in Ohio State. I can tell you that right now.
no.
So
Remember when the States is like, we used to make fun of the States, and the States is now making fun of Canada. Like, where has the time gone where it went completely backwards? And it's all about housing policies. It's housing policies that chosen the forced landlords to do it. Like, people would look at me, I'm like, listen, I never do credit checks. I've had a straight record, not a bad tenant, no one missed a month's rent, and I never done a credit check. You see the economy going the way it is, you now need to know that you need to do your credit check. You need to do your background check. If you're hiring them, or, criminal record check, Googling them on Facebook, or putting them on Facebook, or Googling, starting to see news articles that pop up where there was some type of, they just robbed a corner store. Like, these are the type of things that people find out after they've accepted their tenant, because they're like, dude, like, I want to find out if there's like someone who had these people before had these type of problems. But
some of these some of these databases though are like incredibly helpful. We looked at an applicant the other day, and there was an open application in for a N5 with them or something from a previous landlord. I forget exactly what it was, but when people are actively using this, I know that when we have issues or bad tenants or whatever, which thankfully because of our vetting process isn't happening as frequently or at all lately, actually, to be honest with you. But if we have, we've always reported them to the back end systems. I know Kaylee deals with most of them, but there's like uh, those land. Maybe you can speak to them a little bit more clear than I can. Those where you can report delinquent tenants or some sort of a process that you're in, or some sort of violent tenant, or whatever the case may be. You can
yeah,
report it
like,
on some.
well, you're reporting to frontlobby.com. So you become a member with frontlobby.com. You can report up to 20 current leases, or you can report past tenants going back 6 years. That way it's actually getting shared with Landlord Credit Bureau and Equifax on a monthly basis. So as long as your landlord who's doing the check is not just doing a TransUnion check, he's doing an Equifax check, you're going to be able to see this type of information that's going to be coming up on their record to say what they've done, and seeing if they had left a landlord outstanding. And you get to see that credit score and the breakdown in the background check. And they also do, that breakdown with if that name is similar on social media, like there was a robbery, it's going to say, hey, bring this to light for you. So you can kind of go and look into that article to say, okay, the name is right, is the age right, the situation, the area. So it does, these are the tools that we need to be utilizing until the government says other hand that we can't be doing it one. So don't give anybody ideas that we won't be able to do any type of credit checks in the future. But we have a lot of tools that we could be utilizing. Even looking on Canly, they're slow at it. The landlord and tenant board just had a stakeholder meeting. They have knows the importance of trying to upload the orders onto Canly as fast as they possibly can, but they're delayed, of course, because if they're delayed at getting their hearings, then they're certainly delayed sending the orders to Canly, especially when they're waiting 30 to 60 days before even landlords are getting their orders.
Now, a little while back, probably over a year ago now, I think this was during the COVID times, there was an ombudsman review of the whole LTB process. Do you have any updates on that, where everything is with there?
61 recommendations that came out from that report. They're still obviously accepting, complaints about the landlord and tenant board, which I encourage any landlord who is having any type of issue with the landlord and tenant board that is more not in the, hey, I'm waiting 8 months. It's more the concept that, hey, I did this, I put my paperwork in, they didn't send me my paperwork, or similar to they adjourned a hearing that should have been adjourned. It's more about the process, but still making sure that you're putting your complaint into the ombudsman. Now, the elected officials at the provincial level were kind of acknowledging, hey, yeah, we're going to look at it. We're going to try to adapt a lot of these recommendations. And then, the landlord and tenant board is like, yes, we're in the midst of trying to adapt some of those recommendations. They're not clarifying which ones, and they're not stating how long. So it's like, what is wrong with you guys? Like everything is like that you need to implement. It's taken such a long time dealing with government that they need to change it.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any positive kind of outlooks based on a potential election coming up? This coming up year?
That's going to be a tough one. It's they're playing politics in the housing industry, period, right? So,
Sure.
they're going to be trying to make any type of necessary changes that they can to entice, to pretend that they're looking out for the tenant's best interest, not knowing that it's just going to make it worse for them. Similar to like Bill 97 coming out about the air conditioning, like tenants, you're allowed to have air conditioning. Okay, well, making sure that the tenants understand that if they do install an air conditioner and they do cause damage, well, what's going to happen? We're going to see landlords issuing N5 applications because the damages, if you're not paying for those damages to be done, right? And then they put in the consequences of $50,000 to $100,000 fine for doing an unlawful eviction. So it's a little measly. It's like it's a drop in the bucket of what the problem is. You're not looking at your landlord and tenant board. You're not looking at the adjudicators that they're hiring. You're not looking at the applications and the process for that. So we have no other choice but to sit back, screen our tenants, or get the hell out of the business in general. So this is where a lot of these landlords are now, coming to media trying to do story, but we have story after story after story. If anyone is going to make an impact, this is about getting deep into your elected officials, knowing who your candidates are, and making sure you get them on record stating what they're going to do to bring fairness back to the housing industry, and volunteer, get yourself on housing committees, task force, whatever you need to do. You need to become a loud voice for this private sector and tell them, okay, well, you have a lot of people looking for housing. We're looking for people that have, wages that can be garnished. We have landlords looking for people who have long-term jobs, people who are, responsible adults. These are the ones that could be homeowners, but they're not, because of the high interest rates. They're now taking up these available units. And then the people who are stuck in that rental industry, unfortunately, they're the ones who are now going to be waiting for the government housing waiting list, which it's 12 years in the region of Waterloo and 22 years or more in Mississauga.
I feel like this is one of those things that any elected official, if they truly want to have long, sustainable change, they have to for lack of a better word, fall on their own sword, because they're not going to be a favorite. Then no one's going to like what they have to do, but it kind of has to be done to create the reform necessary to kind of balance out the equation a little bit. Um,
Yeah.
that's kind of the way I see it, because otherwise there's a it's just you're going to have more of the same. You're right. You pander to the audience that is going to get you the votes, and then you have to, stick with it
Well,
in some capacity.
deep down, the taxpayers, they can't afford to keep building, managing, maintaining, and subsidizing government rent. Like, let's be real. You see the need for government housing for year after year, how long it takes to get the shovels in the ground. You see mass immigration that's coming here. We have our colleges, our universities allowing people to come in here, and they don't even have the residency to accommodate the students that they're accepting into our country. So now they're like, okay, we're on damage control now. We have let's talk about a cap. Let's talk about a cap for these students coming in. It's like, too late, dude. Like, these people are now having to be stuffed into units like sardines in a can, or they're actually in the local shelter system because there's no housing. Like,
Yeah.
that's what it's boiled down to be. Our seniors are living in shelters because they lost their spouse, they lost income, they can't afford their house, they can't afford a rental unit. Now the seniors are now living in the shelters. So when we
And
look at like rules, it's got to change.
and going back, what really resonated with me, that whole idea of removing the adjudication of non-payment of rent. If that is, do you know what the percent distribution is across the board of notices? How much non-payment of rent takes up, let's say, on a percent basis versus everything else?
80,000 applications. So that's a good, like, landlords are 90% of the applications at the board.
For sure,
So,
but let's say across 100% of the landlord applications, it's fair to assume that probably 80 to 85% of them are all non-payment of rent issues. Imagine, right?
mhm.
So if you can take out the adjudication aspect of that, you fix the backlog, right? That's missing, right? These people that are waiting just to have somebody validate the math that is in front of them to say yes, in fact, this person hasn't. So like for example, we have non-payment of rent issue nowadays. It will be like an 8-month, 9-month turnaround, right? So
Mm,
if you can change that to a much shorter time frame within the 30-day mark, because it now doesn't require adjudication, you don't need to hire somebody or an appointed official to make these judgments. Now all of a sudden you have this backlog that can theoretically be really decreased. Now you also have the confidence of the landlord that they might be willing to take on somebody that maybe doesn't have the best credit or the best background, or doesn't have maybe all the income to support it, such as students. A lot of times, like, we're skeptical on certain students if they don't have proper co-signage or whatever the case may be, because there's no recourse. There's no recourse on that. So we'll go with somebody who's typically a stronger applicant, that whose income can support the units a little. But I would be willing, if I knew that there was a much shorter time frame to get a tenant out if they didn't pay, I would be much more willing to roll the dice more often. You'd have a lot less vacant units out there. And you drive around Hamilton, especially downtown on Barton Street, every storefront is boarded up. It's ridiculous. You see all these places that you're like, no one's living in that building or has, and yet you've got people outside of the building living on the street.
oh yeah. And that's that problem. Like, when you see how there is a better way of doing things, how come they're not doing it? Like, we could streamline the landlord and tenant board non-payment of rent, but is that going to speed up the landlord and tenant board? Yeah. Is the tenant going to get kicked out a lot quicker than 12 months, because of streamlining this? Yeah. Then they go, whoa, 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 what's going to happen to our municipalities? That's going to be putting a lot of pressure on our municipalities, because now the municipalities are responsible for that shelter cost to put people in emergency shelters. So now it's like, it's passing the buck. Well, the federal government passed the buck to the province passed it to the municipality, and the municipalities are obviously passing any buck they can to the private sector as well. So you see what they have done. It's that now they're just using us as a social agency because they can't try to speed it up quicker if they don't have another process in place, such as putting people in the government housing, the shelter system is stronger, their emergency shelter is stronger, and their local service managers funding is on point.
Hmm.
That's where people are going to the rent banks. They don't know about the rent banks, but they got to be qualified into going to the rent bank. And if you have your bank statement, you can see that they had money and they just spent it. Like you can't abuse. That's taxpayers' money that we can't be allowing to be abused. Just like we have people in government housing that don't need to be there. They're paying market rent, or they're not paying market rent, but they're living with a spouse and they're hiding it. The systems that they have put in place now have been obviously abused, just like the landlord and tenant boards being abused now.
Are adjudicators hired by the municipality or are they hired by the province?
They're hired from the board themselves. Ian Spears, I think, is the one that's doing the interviewing process right now, and hiring adjudicators. And we like to see, like, if you can go Google like the adjudicators, you get to see kind of where their background is. And some of them are coming from social justice tribunals. So someone who's trying to get on OW and ODSP and they get denied, you can actually appeal it at one of these tribunals. These are the people that are coming into the landlord and tenant board now, having these bleeding hearts for these tenants and not even asking for evidence when they state something that the landlord is saying, hey, that's not true. Like,
Hmm.
and again, even if a tenant is going through a hardship situation, or Section 83 comes into play and they can't find other accommodations, or they're going to be homeless, like, why are we allowing an adjudicator to decide to delay or to refuse an eviction? This is my property. This is my bill. They don't pay it. They got to go. Just like you're in a hotel room. If you don't pay their hotel fee, you're locked out. And if you don't leave the premises, the police are coming to remove you. It's still a shelter system. It's still private. Why are you taking advantage of the private sector and allowing someone to stay in someone's house for so long, without compensation? And it's literally financially destroying that investor. And you're obviously putting a bad taste in that landlord's mouth, where he's not going to rent that unit again.
100%. 100%.
Are we drinking
Unfortunately,
on
yeah,
this show? We make sure
yeah,
you're listening. You got to pull up a drink, guys. We'll get you fired up and pissed off with your elected officials.
exactly. Well, so on that actually, I want to backtrack a little bit too, because as you know, the podcast is the Real Estate Leadership and Legacy podcast, and I think that you are somebody who has hoisted the flag and are now very clearly recognized as a leader, fronting this cause. And I think that's wonderful. One thing that I'd like to give a shout out to, which we couldn't make this year, but we made it in the prior years, is your conference. So the Ontario Landlord Watch does a conference based out of Cambridge, right? Just outside of Cambridge, I
Yeah,
believe.
right in Cambridge. Right in
Right
Cambridge.
in Cambridge. Okay, good. I
There's a
had that
request
right.
to move it into Toronto, and they want us to go Toronto for the next year, and I'm like,
The
like, there's a lot
venue's
of
great.
planning, and I'm like, do
Venue's
I
great.
want to go Toronto?
But you guys typically, it's October, right? That's when you
Yeah,
guys
we
typically
usually
have.
have it in October. October is
Yeah.
our month.
And this is where, all kinds of real estate investors alike and rental housing providers and property managers alike can all kind of come together and share ideas. And um, last time we went, it was great. A ton of very valuable information. You guys had some great panels. So I'm guessing next year you guys are planning to do an even bigger hurrah. Every single
Yeah,
year is growing a little more.
yeah, we just had this one. Everyone said it was the best one yet. So we had some skits, some entertainment that was happening. So people, I got a little clip of it. I'm just kind of hesitant on actually posting it. It was
Yeah.
funny. Found it funny. We had over like $4,000 worth of prizes that we gave out. We want to reward our landlords for, being strong and staying in this. Is like we're like the landlord survivors. So we like to celebrate once a year, come together, compact a lot of information that we were able to absorb throughout the year, and also give everybody an update of what we're doing as an advocacy group, how they can get involved into the advocacy, what they need to do, what they need to say, and deep down is getting them that education. There's lots of different ways that you can approach the board and go through the process, but sometimes you need that out of box thinking, saying, hey, this is the situation. Is there certain sentences or certain letters that I should be writing my tenant in order to try to avoid going to the landlord and tenant board altogether, right? And then that's just always about providing customer service, being firm, being very educated on how you're speaking with your tenants, and having that friendship and not too friendly. Some of our landlords are too friendly with our tenants, and that's when it becomes difficult now trying to deal with the situation that they may be in because they became that friendship with them. So it's always just about unlocking everything. So we're having an opportunity soon where landlords who are dealing with situations, they can kind of come on channel, tell us what's going on, and we can kind of walk them through it. So it's almost like, Dear Abby, something where you can call in and just have that other landlords or, paralegal to have that advice to walk you down that dangerous path that you're going to be going down.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's very, very good. But I do want to turn the attention to you personally a little bit because of this being also a leadership type oriented podcast. I think a lot of people, when they look at what you've championed and they see where you're at, they're like, oh man, that is awesome. Like, how did you get to that level? And internally, I know sometimes people are like, I wish I could be that kind of a champion too, or a leader in the situation, or whatever the case may be, or both in your case, the way we see it. But how did you get started in this whole process of actually finding the passion within you to be like, no, no, enough is enough. Like something has to be done. Because I think anybody that I would talk to across, more established real estate investors would be like, they know your name and they all are working towards helping you get your message out as best as possible. But that took time. It took time to now be recognized as that. So how did that, tell us a little bit about how you started on that.
Well, you started off with a water billing that was forcing landlords to be responsible for their tenants' delinquent utility bills, and knowing that, okay, where do I find landlords? And I'm like, okay, let's call them on Kijiji. I'm like, this is bullshit. I'm like, I'm not paying for my tenants unpaid bills. I'm not going to wait for them to get pissed off about, not paying their rent and they're going to leave the water on running nonstop. I'm like, I know we have power in numbers. And that's when we started calling people from, Kijiji, getting them down at a protest at City Hall. Then I'm like, okay, we need to start educating these landlords. Let's start, pulling ourselves together with, what's the RTA, what the LTB is. Like, let's navigate this system together. And we started having like meetups at the Royal Canadian Legions. Then we had educational seminars that were in my 2-bedroom unit. I used to cook for three different sessions for a bunch of people. And I'm like, I'm tired of cooking now. I'm like, we gotta do something else. And then we, got the Facebook group going so that, we are able to communicate with each other on a regular basis. If something's happening in a city, we want to know about it. So that way you can rally that support within your network to say, okay, like we just found out from, someone that Brampton is doing landlord licensing pilot program, now we need to make sure that landlord there has more landlords in that area to help him get that message out there, connect them to media, connect them to the elected officials, tell them what to say and how to say it. And really it's about taking a part in every podcast, every interview. Like we know we have our thought process on mainstream media. But I'm like, nope, still got to go on. I'm still driving to go on to any interview, TVO, CBC, global news. It's all important for them to at least know what we're doing, and then we can give them more information after. But you will have power in numbers, and I think that's what I've been blessed to have is the friends that I've made throughout these years, and who keep encouraging me to keep going. There's many times where I'm like, dude, like, is this like spinning my wheels here? Or, what have we prevented? Or what have we changed by our advocacy voice and doing these reports to the elected officials and the Ministry of Housing, having meetings with them? Is there something that we've kind of stopped just because of that one meeting? Or, do we have, online? We were talking about online for landlord and tenant board hearings way before COVID. And when we did have COVID, they just had to speed up the process because they did say that they were planning to go online before COVID. They just said COVID just helped sped that process up, which is like, okay, that's great. At least we're online and not having to worry about being in a community center, standing there for hours, waiting for the check-in, tenants don't show up, and then you're waiting there for another 45 minutes before they want to release you, before you can even, go on with your day. So we have a lot that we've been able to push, but at the same time, we're now just putting ourselves in a category to say, we are the private housing sector. This is who we are, and we need to be able to have that strong voice, just like any sector that we have in Canada.
Especially when it's so much in demand too. This is not nothing,
Oh, they need
obviously.
us. They know they need us. So, the need is just going to keep growing for them. And that means that the taxpayers are going to be paying for it. So they shouldn't be completely going rah. We need private, government housing, more government housing, because it's going to come to a breaking point as well.
Does it sometimes, like when you look back at kind of where you started, like cooking meals in a 2-bedroom apartment for people just packed into your living room and listening to you, to now like having a conference and to now being, featured on global news? I know you've got I've seen a couple of snippets of you and Ken Beekendam talking on CHCH, I believe it is, in the morning. Like
Yep.
this is not nothing, right? I think it just goes to show you like the power of grinding and grit. And I think encouragement along the way is obviously important, but it takes an internal kind of fire to persevere as well, no doubt.
You know what? I come from that family of tenants, right? My husband comes from that family of landlords. When you see what our elected officials who we put our trust in to represent all parties, all their constituents, and they're picking sides just because their own political game, that's when you got to stop. People would say, Kayla, you got to run. Kayla, we can see you to be the next minister of housing. I'm like, you know what? If you look at what it in details about picking that candidate to run as that conservative, liberal, whoever, there's more behind it. It's not like, I just want to run. No, they can try to disqualify you. They're going to put their support, their team is going to put the support behind whoever they want, and it almost becomes like a popularity contest. Not that you have good ideas, because no elected official is going to have the answers to all of the stuff that they need to focus on as an MPP or an MPP. But you just need to have someone with that common sense, and that person's willing to listen to the public and say, let's hold your hand, let's do this together, because everyone deserves to have that voice. But
Mhm.
unfortunately, they're just looking at it as a job.
Yep, that's the truth. Have you ever thought about running for that position?
I ran in the 2014 election for Ward 1 councillor, and that was just because the councillor who voted against the water billing policy, she wanted to take me out for dinner. And I'm like, you just voted against me. Now you want to take me out for dinner? I'm like, this should be good. Like, what are you doing here? Right. So we went out, nice little restaurant, I must say. And I'm like, so what's this all about? And she's like, well, it's National Women's Day. You're such a positive role model in the community. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, thanks. And then dessert came around and she's like, are you going to run? I'm like, there you go. This is what this meeting's about. You think because I'm championing this cause, you think I actually have an ambition to run? I'm like, you know what? I think I will. And I'm going to run in your ward. And I came in second place. I never knocked on a single door. I had like 50 signs. I'm sitting there election night going, please don't let me get in. Please don't let me get in. I'm like 24 years old. I'm like, I just wanted to make her like, like, no, you voted
Went,
against me. I'm
went a little
running.
bit. That's awesome.
But at the
Well,
same
now,
time, you need money, you need support. Like it's really hard to try to get yourself into elected position when, and then it's like with money comes like favors, like that's the where it comes from. So it's like, no, I'll support you, or I'll support whatever, and like you don't have to like give that donation, but if you give it, don't expect this type of favoritism that would happen, right? But
yeah.
it was a fun go. You get your taste of everything that I'm excited for. But I feel like if you became an elected official, you're quiet, you're silent, you have a code of conduct, you have different things that you can say, can't say. I like to be free spirited. And I tell people, I'm like, I'm still at an age where you still might catch me dancing on a bar or something. So can't have that front page in the
Yeah.
newspaper, right? So
Photos leaked. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, excellent. So on that, we're at, it's nice to hear a little bit about your background, what kind of inspired you. And now I'd like to talk a little bit about the legacy you want to leave, because you've created this movement and I think you've reignited the confidence and that faith that something is going to happen that's positive, within us. And by us, I mean like collective real estate investors throughout Southern Ontario, at least. What kind of legacy are you hoping to leave behind? Is this something that you're like, you know what, I want to I found my passion and I want to do this forever? Is this something where like, no, at a certain point I'd like to pass this torch on and then just sit back? Or what do you see as your legacy within this?
I say I'm a nagging housewife and I don't like taking no for an answer. So I like to see an overhaul of the landlord and tenant board to really announce my departure of anything.
Mhm.
Or it's the day that I sell all my rentals in Ontario and I get out of Canada, so it all depends on what it is. But as long as I'm able to continue to keep providing that support and that education to these landlords who are stuck in this trap, that's what makes me feel good. We ask people, like, when you're talking to me and they give me the good news or they tell me what's happening and how my advice helped them, I'm like, hey, give a Google review. I want my elected officials who I speak with, be able to Google me, see what people are saying about, how I've been able to help you or how the community was able to help you. That's the goal here, is to keep helping these landlords as they go through this difficult time. And in the meantime, we're also still advocating to change it so it doesn't have to be so difficult for them, that they can do it on themselves and that they don't need people like myself to guide them. So a lot of it's going to be that support that I don't think has ever been there for these investors. And so far, for the last 13 years, we've been doing that, and I take great pride in what these landlords are saying about how I've helped them, and making sure that these tenants that are out there, knowing that they are abusing this landlord, that their time is up, because I'm educating that landlord now to make sure that they don't do it again.
Indeed. Well, I know that you've influenced a lot of people, and everyone we talk to has nothing but amazing things to say about you. So, us included. And so, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on this platform. And so, if anybody would like to get a hold of you, or anybody wants to get involved in this process, what's the best way they can do that?
Yeah, they can reach out to me on Facebook. So you can send me a friend request there, or follow me on there and send me a direct message letting me know that you're trying to come into the group. Then we have the Ontario Landlords Watch members group on Facebook. So you can send a friend request or a request to join in. Just tell us that you heard us on this podcast with Alex, and I can let you in a little bit quicker. You can also send me an email at olwlandlords@gmail.com, and then I'll be able to get back to you as quick as I possibly can.
Amazing. Thank you once again for joining. You're always a breath of fresh air when it comes to this gloomy topic. So we appreciate everything you do.
Well, thank you, Alex, for having me on, and I look forward to connecting with as many people as I can through listening and understanding that we are stronger together. We have to be more supportive, and we have much more to plan now for 2024. And I hope to have everyone on board and doing this together.
Perfect. Perfect. All right. Thanks, guys, for joining me on today's episode of the Real Estate Leadership and Legacy Podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and please check out some of our other videos. We've got an abundance out there. We've got a lot of great insight and information, and we'll see you guys on the next one.